extend a very warm welcome to all of you. It's particular pleasure to welcome you to an evening devoted to something so fundamental to human existence, yet so often taken for granted, the art and discipline of thinking. We live in an age in which information is abundant, opinions are instantaneous, reactions are almost automatic, and attention is increasingly fragmented. We have acquired extraordinary technological capacities to process information, but the more profound question remains, have we become better at thinking? That's precisely why ThinkWise thinking strategy is both timely and intellectually provocative. Mala Varma Thapar's book begins with a deceptively simple proposition: every action begins with a thought. But between thought and action lies a space for reflection, discernment, empathy, and choice. It's perhaps in that space that wisdom begins. The book therefore moves beyond thinking as a purely cognitive activity. It asks us to consider how we think and what happens to individuals and societies when we stop thinking, when reflection is disciplined by assumption, and when emotion overwhelms judgment. As the author observes, conflicts often arise when people stop thinking and start assuming. What makes the book especially interesting is breadth. It traverses holistic, smart, focused, realistic, creative, strategic, possibility, reflective, shared, and altruistic modes of thinking. In that sense, this is not simply a book, but a book about intelligence. It is about consciousness. And perhaps the most important proposition is that thinking can be cultivated, it can be learned, taught, and absorbed. That proposition acquires particular significance in education. A truly educated person is not merely someone who possesses knowledge, but someone who can question, connect, reflect, imagine, emphasize, and arrive at judgment without surrendering to prejudice or impulse. The book also reminds us of something deeply civilizational, from the Upanishadic and Vedantic traditions to Buddha and Mahavira, and from Gandhi to Jung and other modern thinkers. The disciplined mind has long been regarded as an instrument of human transformation. The question, therefore, is not simply what do we think, but what kind of human beings does our thinking make us? And who better to chair such a conversation than Dr. Karan Singh? Dr. Karan Singh occupies a rare intellectual territory with statesmanship, philosophy, spirituality, and culture intersect. A former Sadr Riyasat of Jammu and Kashmir, Governor, Union Minister, diplomat, and parliamentarian, he has also been a scholar of Sri Aurobindo and Indian thought. Chancellor of Universities, President of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and a distinguished presence in the cultural and intellectual life of India. But perhaps what is more relevant this evening is not the extraordinary range of offices he has held, but the philosophical depth with which he has inhabited them. Gandhiji's description of him as the wise one acquires an especially resonant meaning in an evening devoted to the relationship between thought and wisdom. Indeed, Dr. Karan Singh's own foreword to this book places the question in stark moral terms. Thought can create a culture of violence and intolerance or become an instrument of positive transformation. We are deeply privileged to have you here with us, sir. I also warmly welcome Shri K.N.Srivastava, Director of the International Center, whose distinguished public career has traversed culture, civil aviation, archaeology, and international affairs. As Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Culture, Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, Additional Secretary and Financial Advisor to the Ministry of External Affairs, and Secretary in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, he brings to public life a rare combination of administrative experience and engagement with India's cultural inheritance. Welcome, Mr. Srivastava. And then we come to the author herself, Mala Varma Thapar, educator, writer, poet, consultant, and facilitator, whose intellectual journey has consistently brought together education, inclusiveness, creativity, and the inner life. Her experience across India and Canada, including extensive work with teachers, students, and diverse learning communities, has given her a distinctive perspective on the ways in which thinking can be nurtured, particularly among the young. Her work in inclusive education has focused on accommodating differences of culture, ability, and social circumstance within educational systems. She is also a writer of considerable range with 17 books spanning self development, poetry, and fiction, with her creative work receiving international recognition. Her poem Grit and Grain, for instance, reached an unusual artistic confluence through a BBC production featuring Malika Sarabhai and T.M. Krishna. But perhaps the most revealing biography or writer is the question that animates her writing. In this book and in the accompanying reflections on consciousness, relationship, memory, and transformation, Mala repeatedly returns to the inward journey. Who am I? What do I see? What do I understand? What remains concealed beneath the surface of experience? Her writing suggests that thinking is not merely an intellectual exercise, it can become a pathway to self recognition and transformation. And that brings us to the larger significance of this evening. In an age of algorithms, artificial intelligence, information overload, and accelerated communication, perhaps the greatest human skill we need to recover is the capacity to pause. To pause before reacting, to reflect before judging, to listen before answering, to imagine another perspective before rejecting it, to think beyond the self. For reflective thinking is ultimately an ethical act. It asks us to consider consequences not merely for ourselves, but for the other, for society, for the environment, and for the fragile fabric of human relationships. The deepest question, therefore, may not be can we think? We obviously can. Can we think wisely? And perhaps beyond that, can our thinking make us wiser, more humane, and more responsible? I believe that this conversation, this book invites us to enter, is therefore going to, answer not only the questions, but raise questions pertaining to the consciousness. With this, may I again welcome the distinguished speakers and to all of you who have joined us this evening. Over to you, sir.
You're becoming an expert.
Dr. Karan Singh ji, Mala Thapar ji, ladies and gentlemen. About the two books authored by Mala Thapar, Usha has already given a complete overview as to what these books contain and what are we going to hear from Dr. Karan Singh ji and Mala Thapar ji. I would only like to say a few words. First of all, my compliments to Mala Thapar. She has been relentlessly pursuing her literary interest, and she brings out very short books, but those books are full of knowledge, lot of ideas, lot of concepts she brings out in those books. I remember last year we discussed her book on Max Muller. It was very fine book and really gave us a complete overview of what the personality of Max Muller was. These two books, as Usha has already hinted at, are again going to generate a lot of interest. Very many issues these books have raised. As she mentioned, what to think and how to think. The book actually now gives a different dimension, saying that book examines different approaches, including holistic, smart, focused, realistic, creative, strategic, reflective, and altruistic thinking. So it's not just simple thinking. All these components are going to be part of that thinking process. Likewise, the second book, Lives Lived and Unlived, on transition and transformation. Here again, she gives a reflective exploration of memory, consciousness, relationship, and search for the self. Between lived experience, memory, and a quasi-imaginative world, etc., etc. As I mentioned, she has been a scholar who has really studied the philosophy, the spirituality, the psychology, all those aspects which have been dealt with by great figures like Carl Jung and Max Muller. So I would not like to say much because let us hear more from her and still more from Dr. Karan Singh ji. Sir, your presence, simply your sheer presence, really inspires every one of us. And whenever you come, naturally we get attracted, and it's such a great, honor and pleasure to hear you, sir. So with these few words, once again, I join Usha in welcoming all of you, and let us look forward for something very, very enriching experience, enriching, discussion, in today's program. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Okay. I welcome the audience. Many thanks to Dr. Karan Singh for taking time and initiative, and the IIC for providing the venue. Not to forget Usha Munshi for her for introduction, and Dr. Srivastava for his talk. Today I speak about two important issues: think smart and lives lived and unlived. The first of all, I'm going to tell you a little story to get you all started. It's called The Eagle. Once upon a time, while walking through the forest, a certain farmer found a young eagle. He took it home and put it in his barnyard, where it soon learned to eat chicken feed and behave as chickens behave. One day, a naturalist who was passing by inquired of the owner why it was that the eagle, the king of all the birds, should be confined to live in a barnyard with the chickens. Since I've given it chicken feed and trained it to be a chicken, it has never learned to fly, replied the owner. It behaves as a chicken behaves, so it is no longer an eagle. Still, insisted the naturalist, it has the heart of an eagle and can surely be taught how to fly. After talking it over, the two men agreed to find out whether this was possible. Gently, the naturalist took the eagle in his arms and said, "You belong to the sky. Stretch forth your wings and fly." The eagle, however, was confused. He did not know who he was, and seeing the chickens eating their food, he jumped down to be with them again. Undismayed, the naturalist took the eagle on the following day upon the roof of the house and urged him again, saying, "You are an eagle, stretch forth your wings and fly." But the eagle was afraid of his unknown self and the world, and jumped down once again for chicken feed. On the third day, the naturalist rose early and took the eagle out of the barnyard to a high mountain. There he held the king of the birds high above him and encouraged him, saying, "You are an eagle, you belong to the sky, stretch your wings and fly." The eagle looked back towards the barnyard and up to the sky. Still he did not fly. Then the naturalist lifted him straight towards the sun, and it happened that the eagle began to tremble. Slowly he stretched his wings. At last, with a triumphant cry, he soared away into the heavens. It may be that the eagle still remembers the chickens with nostalgia. It may even be that he occasionally revisits the barnyard. But as far as anyone knows, he has never returned to lead the life of a chicken. He was an eagle, though he had been kept and tamed as a chicken. The moral of the story in the beginning of this is that this is what thinking does. As we think, so we become. And this has been my experience with myself and with all the people I encountered in my work and home. So, therefore, you change your thinking, you change your life. That's the bottom line. Now, I'm going to read Dr. Karan Singh's foreword, which is really a very good present to me. It says, "Thinking is not only an automatic process, it can be disciplined and utilized for very positive purposes. In fact, our ancient classics have taught us a great deal about the power of a disciplined mind." Then he mentions me, who has been a school educationist for several decades, has written a book entitled Think Smart. It has 15 different areas with regard to thinking. This is a bold effort to study in depth the process of thinking, particularly with regard to how young people can be encouraged to think creatively. Then he mentions about Descartes' famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," is very true. It all depends on what we think about. If our thoughts are constantly about violence, greed, intolerance, lust, and hatred, then that is the sort of society that we'll create and have in fact created. On the contrary, the Vedanta, Buddha, Mahavira, and contemporary icons such as C.G. Jung, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and others have proclaimed the importance and power of positive thinking. I'm sure this book will be of value to the general public, but particularly to educators, and he commends me for delving deep into the whole process of thinking. So thank you very much for your presence, Dr. Karan Singh. I'm going to talk about something very, very simple, which is we all know the facts, what it does to think. But little thing, incidents like this evening rather, I left home with everything I needed and forgot the main thing. What was that? My purse. So I forgot it. When I reached the IIC, I said, God, I've forgotten my purse. Not that it mattered anymore. I didn't need any money from it. But what I needed was these books, which I had brought a couple of them, 20 of them, and the key of the locker was in the purse. So never mind. So then I told myself, this is one of the ways of thinking. Things may be out there in your vision, but not in your line of vision. There are things when we put our mind, they're right before us and we don't see them. They're right beside us, we don't see them because our line of vision is different. So that's one kind of thinking. Another kind of thinking when things really go wrong are when we are preconceived about ideas that this is how it is. And this is where Leonardo da Vinci comes in. He said, my life has been one of assumptions. The greatest mistakes I've made about is when I've assumed things, I've opinionized on things, and when my line of vision has moved. So therefore, in order to be really thoughtful, one has to think of what one has to do immediately, focus thinking. So I'm going to just rattle off the different thinkings and pass you a few examples that you can substantiate with your own examples. And there is focused thinking. We have like Arjun was being taught by Dhritarashtra, and he took the students there and he says, what do you see on the tree? So somebody said, branch, this, that, and the other. So Arjun said, I see the eye of the bird. I remember that very well. So Dhritarashtra said, okay, you are my pupil because you have really focused on something that you have to do. So these are the things, if we focus, there's no reason why we make an error. Then there are other kinds of thinking. For example, there's altruistic thinking. Everybody thinks of themselves, oh, I'm right. This is what my thoughts are, but they're not. The world is wide. Like Vivekananda says, there was a frog in the well. He thought the well was his house. That's all that there was. Till another frog came from the sea, and then he showed him, he says, yes, I've come from the sea. There's a whole world out there. So therefore, altruistic thinking is thinking about the other person also and opening your mind to thinking maybe there's another viewpoint which can add to mine. So we grow not with just ourselves, but with interactions. That's where we have these little cultural and intellectual spaces we create where we have think tanks and we do things. Okay. Now, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm going to go through the various things like realistic thinking. Very many people say, be real, get real. So what is getting real? Realistic thinking is knowing your own expectations from what you're doing and knowing your own limitations also. Many people don't know their limitations. They want to do this, they just have the expectations, and the other way around. So realistic thinking really comes to expectation and limitations. Then we have focused, I told you about. Then we have smart thinking. What is smart thinking? It's a thinking after thought. If I had only thought. If I had only thought, I would have been a different person. If I would have achieved more or achieved less or made more money, not sold my house. Same thing as I sold a condo in Toronto and it rose up. I said, why did I sell the condo? It didn't occur to me at that point. So that's what happens. Now, procrastination is the cause for this. Then there is holistic thinking, as we talked about, to feel comfortable with uncertainty. When you think sometimes you're uncertain, will it work, will it not work, and you're caught in that ambiguity. So that ambiguity can be reduced by holistic thinking, thinking of every avenue, having a plan B. So in case your plan A doesn't work, you have something to fall back upon. It's not, life's not over. Because there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be downfalls. Now, creative thinking, this is a key thing in education. And when teachers tell them to be creative, they don't give them the space to be creative. The best thing is every creative person knows that creativity arrives from mistakes, from making mistakes, from trying this, trying that. But that trial and error space is taken up by do this, do that, very rigid lines. And same thing in any field. So creativity requires space. It requires freedom. It's a powerhouse of ideas from which everything comes. You celebrate the offbeat. Then we have critical thinking, which is also very important. The other day, somebody told me in schools, the children are not allowed to criticize the teacher. I was talking creative thinking. I said, why? They said, if the student criticizes, 20% of the mark is gone for the student. Now, who ever heard of that? In fact, critical thinking is something which brings out the idea, the unlearned idea, and tells the teacher what exactly they need. And same is with organizations. So, then the energy of possibility thinking. There's a thing saying impossible. Now that's broken into I am possible. So that's positive strategic thinking, possibility thinking. You strategize, and strategize means you think about various issues and how you're going to act when and why so. So that you can find in the book, which I'll bring to you. Bottom line thinking, I'm getting to now. The actions of men are the best interpreters of their thoughts, said John Locke. Bottom line thinking does not come at the end of a process, but at the beginning. It's not attached to returns, but to commitment to grow, to build, to be. Benefits of bottom line thinking. It brings clarity. It makes one assess the situation. It helps one to make better decisions and ensure a better future. Now, how do we cultivate bottom line thinking? We identify what's really the bottom line, then make a button of the bottom line point, create a strategic plan to achieve the bottom line. The trouble is that when we fail to plan, fail to plan, yes, we plan to fail. That's very, very common. So it's the planning stage that is key in any little or big endeavor. That's what I have found, at least. So Think Smart emphasizes how to enhance our thinking to better our life. It comes to the classroom of life at a time when conflict and wars rage. People have stopped thinking for themselves and are led by popular thinking. This is another thing. You know what everybody thinks, we also think. We put a check mark too. But we stop thinking about ourselves, giving AI and technology the power to think. And that has really diminished our personalities, because what one can think is what one can do. But what others can think, maybe one cannot do. So those little key finer points one has to keep in mind. All right, that's said. Now, I am going to go to the other book, which is Lives Lived and Unlived. So this is a fascinating book which also requires thinking. It's called Transition and Transformation. I'm going to give you a little brief talk about something which is very, very significant, because there is the known and the unknown fields. And the story revolves around two characters who have acquired a certain insight. And they don't know it at that point in time, but as time passes, all the ideas, all the unconsciousness that unfolds, because we have lived a life before. All those who believe in reincarnation know that we have lived a life before, and we will live a life after this also. But to think that this is the one and only life we have lived is to forget what was and what is to come. So this is the book that deals with that. And the foreword is fascinating. It says, Lives Lived, and it's by Dr. Karan Singh. Lives Lived and Unlived is a fascinating study into the psychological and spiritual developments of the various characters of the book. Interested in the concept of spiritual consciousness, this is reflected in many of our writings. The current work is a novel that can often deal effectively with psychological structures. The book will make interesting reading for all those who wish to look deeper into the motivation and psychological imperatives faced by many people in their daily lives. There is a time when psychology and spirituality connect. Now I'm giving you three little stories, three little examples from this book, which really came to me. I didn't go to them. And this book came to me. I didn't write it. It was like being written. So I'm going to start one. Sheila was making her way home through crowded streets. Lights flickered. A dog barked. Rain pitter-pattered on the tin roof of a motel in Middlesex, Oxford. She remembered how it had been raining cats and dogs when they had first met at Doss, Germany. Today, a woman gathered a shawl around her and a man opened his umbrella. This is the beginning. And everything, every metaphor, like rain, like a person opening something or closing something, is of opening and closing of lives, incidents, time, and space. Sheila had observed his expression as the fire blazed, throwing light on them. And I can read you only small pieces. She sailed through memories. While she knew where he lived, was he aware where she lived? Physical events are being looked at in mechanistic and energetic event, Max said. Like the stream flowing into the river, their conversation flowed into the relations between ancient texts. This gave impetus to research of ancient Indian literature. Both felt energized as the music of ancient law weaved its way through pristine moments of realization.
आगे आइए.
So the three things that I've taken up in this come from Shaivism, which are one, recognition, two, realization, and three is reciprocation. So these three, can you hear me, everybody? Yes, all right. So these are the three concepts which contain our life, the three containers which we recognize. That who are we recognizing? Ourselves, another, the situation, this life, that life. But we are recognizing and discerning and making decisions out of this. And not just that, it's really a very different world when you get down to Shaivism, when you get down to the three, recognition, realization, and reciprocation. So I have three memories which I remember very clearly. I've put down. When I was a little girl, I had a bad chest in the sense that I used to keep getting sick. So my father was a smoker, so I used to keep getting sick. So the doctor every day, my mother said, well, people go to the temple and I bring you to you, Dr. Satwan Singh. So, we used to go to Missouri for summer vacations. So somebody told her, there is a saint there. If you go and take your daughter there. I was 7. So I went in, and this is a true story. I went in there, and there were all these potlies hanging, and a man came out, and he looked at me. He didn't look at my mother, and he kind of smiled at me. And this is a long story. It's a short story, but it has a background. So he gave asked me to open my mouth and put some medication in it. And he said, you'll be okay for 1 year. You've got to give her this. And she gave it, and I was okay. Now, who was this man? After 1 year, we went back, and she wanted to look up. We went around, asked people. They said, we don't know. He's not here. Okay. Now, how did she know? Who was he? So many years ago, I met the Dalai Lama. I had the good fortune of traveling with him from Delhi to Mumbai. I was going for a lecture at Tata Memorial, and he was there, and we sat next to each other. So in the middle seat, he covered my hand, and he held it till the flight, 2 hours. And then he was speaking to me about Shanti Deva, and he was speaking to me about many things, and he gave me his picture and wrote down. And he said, you must read his books. Unfortunately, I misplaced that real picture that he gave me, his secretary gave me, with Shanti Deva and his books written. And I forgot the name of Shanti Deva many years ago. Then suddenly I had a bad throat and a bad chest, and I remembered my mother, and she took me there, and I remembered Shanti Deva out of the thing. So, that very night I had a dream. This is transcendental. That very night I had a dream that I was walking on a rough terrain in a mountain, and it was very crisp and cold. And suddenly I was tired, and I see there a man, very distinguished man, sitting on a charpoy near a rock. So as I approach him, he says to me, I was waiting for you. Have a seat. So there's a rock. He pointed to a rock. I sat down. And then he got up, and he said, okay, follow me. And he took me to a cave. And as he walked in the cave, there were lots of clones, people who were just like him, cloned. And I turned back to look at him, but he had disappeared. I saw a butterfly fly out of that. I'll tell you the relevance of this. And then the butterfly flew out of that. And then there were a couple of butterflies flew out, all those people vanished. It was a dream. So I walked out, and I saw there was light. There was a light in a beautiful garden. There's a brook. So I was thirsty. I bent down to drink water, and suddenly I see his figure again. He says, I asked him, what's your name? He says, my name is Shanti Deva. And I woke up. Now, day before yesterday, I was reading about Einstein, and what Einstein said before he died, which has not been published, which has not been given to anybody but to a nurse. And what he said was this. He says, there is a cave, which we pass through, and there's light at the other side of the cave. And that is a transition between this and that life. This is like transcendence and transformation. And I read that sentence a couple of times, and I said, well, this sounds familiar. So lots of things that happen to us when our inside awakening takes place, inner awakening, whatever we call it, takes place. And it doesn't take place by any knowledge of this world or that world. There definitely is something which we start acquiring once we open our minds. That's where thinking comes in. Okay, so another little story which I'll tell you, true stories these are, from Lives Lived and Unlived. It was Schiphol Airport in Netherlands. And there was all these Renaissance exhibitions on in bookstores. There was one beautiful book about Van Gogh. And I'd already bought a couple of them, and I said, I can't afford this book, but I wanted to buy it. I kept going back to it again and again. Ultimately, I said, forget it, I'll buy it, put it on my card. So I went and bought it, and I came away. And we were thirsty. We still had half an hour to for the flight to take on, and sat down, my daughter and I. And as I was looking at the book, that page in which a self picture was there, painting, I heard a voice call me. So it was the guy who was serving everybody, the server. He says, is this your RBC card? Is this your credit card? I said, yeah, but how did you get it? I'd paid him in euros and cash. So he said, that man gave it to me. So he pointed to a person, and that person was ditto the same that I was looking at Van Gogh's picture. So I looked at his picture and I looked at that guy. This is maybe all people are here the same looking, but it wasn't. The same hair, same build, everything. So when I looked down, I was wanting to ask a question. I asked him, do you know Dutch? I don't know Dutch. So I asked him in Dutch, where did he find this card? So by the time he looked at that man, he was gone. He was just gone. And all along in the aircraft, I was thinking, how did he get my credit card when I picked it up? And how did he know I was sitting in this cafe? And who was he? So the answer came to me that it was Van Gogh's way of saying thank you. So there are these incidents which take place in life many a time. Okay, I'm going on and on, but I'm going to read you at the end of this lovely story, which I think Max Miller never visited India for 35 years, and he wrote dearly about it. He was very fond of it. So he has visited India in the best of bodies and the best of minds and hearts. And I have a feeling that we don't want to name anybody, but there is a connection that comes back in life, goes and comes back. The end. The sun was setting. The sky was a beautiful orange. Sheila peeled an orange and shared its citrus sweetness with Ashok, watching the last rays dip into eternal ocean. Then they looked at each other, transitioned and transcended into the deep blue of the sky and the ocean. Both had met as the sun descended, because their lives were closing, spilling orange all over the sky. Colors covered the sky, becoming a canopy under which realization of the self formed patterns of lives lived and unlived. Thank you.
Yeah. Srivastava Mala Thapar, and friends. To begin with, the dedication is to Dr. Karan Singh, the one Gandhiji called the wise one. Let me clarify. Gandhiji didn't call me the wise one. What happened was this, I'll tell you. I met Gandhiji in 1947 in Srinagar. Under a tree, अगर आप वहाँ जाएं, Paris Hotel में, so there's a board there. This is where Mahatma Gandhi met Maharaja Hari Singh, Maharani Tara Devi, and Yuvraj Karan Singh, as I was at the time. But that is, I met him and he just said, "Kaise ho?" But what happened was, I became Sadr Riyasat, and every year there used to be a governor's conference in Delhi. And in 1954, I was invited to the governor's conference as Sadr Riyasat, head of state. There were Raj Pramukhs, there were governors, and there was me. So I was put up in the Dwarka suite, which is their biggest suite. And that night I had a dream. And I remember that dream much more clearly than I remember Gandhiji himself. I was standing in the middle of the room, Gandhiji opened the door and came in, dressed in spotless white. He put his left hand on my shoulder, took my right hand in his, and looked at it and said, "You will be a very wise man." So whether I fulfilled his philosophy or not, I don't know. That's for you to decide. But that's how he called me in a way. He did call me a wise man. He said, "You will be a wise man." I was only, what, 23 or something at the time. But anyhow. Now, I think it's fascinating, this book on thinking. Because thinking, everybody thinks. But I think this is the first time somebody has actually tried to identify different forms of thinking. And I found it very, very fascinating. There's a whole different types of thinking, some of which were mentioned by the author. How to think, holistic thinking and so on, smart thinking, focused thinking, popular thinking. Now, the point is, we all think automatically because our brains work in that way. But the question is, what do we think about? If we think about negative things, then we'll become negative. If we think about positive things, then we'll become positive. So, I think the point that comes through in this book is that thinking doesn't have to be just automatic. You can train your mind to think. That is what yoga is all about. That is what all our texts tell us, that you can train your mind to think in a positive manner. If you do that, then the mind becomes a powerful instrument. Because the human brain is the most complex and exciting product ever created by humanity, by evolution. How is it that the human brain functions in this manner? How does it think? How does it react? There's a lot of research going on nowadays, by the way, about the way the human mind acts. What is the brain-mind synthesis? Is the mind something that the brain secretes, or how does it develop? But it is very important that from early schooling, children must be taught the possibility of thinking positively. I think that is a very important point, because we talk about everything, but I don't think we ever taught how to think. क्योंकि जैसे विचार होंगे वैसे ही जाके आगे आदमी की व्यक्तित्व बनेगा, वैसे ही देश बनेगा. So if our thoughts are all negative, then we'll be in a very negative society. And today, if you look what is happening, look at the conflicts everywhere. Wars in Europe. We thought wars in Europe were finished in 1944, 42. And they've started again. And wars in Asia. I mean, this whole Gaza massacre of the Palestinians and so on. Wars in Latin America, wars in Africa. Everywhere wars. What is wrong? Has the human mind become corroded and corrupted? There must be some reason. Evolutionary philosophers like Sri Aurobindo and Teilhard de Chardin postulate that we are moving towards a higher level of consciousness. But quite frankly, Srivastava ji, मुझे लगता नहीं है कि हम higher level पे जा रहे हैं. If anything, I think we are regressing. I have had occasion to watch this world develop, as far as I can remember, for at least 85 years. And I've seen the way the Second World War, I remember very well. I was at Doon School during the Second World War. तो सारा हम सुनते थे, अभी ये हुआ, now the British have attacked, now Hitler have attacked. That Second World War से लेके आज जो wars चल रही हैं, I've seen them all. There was a time in between, I must tell you, when I thought that we were breaking out of this negative syndrome. At the end of the last century, I was talking a lot about globalization. I used to go around the globe uplifting the glories of globalization, how we were going to become, first of all, regional groups like or European Union and so on. Then we were going to become a confederation. In the 21st century, there's been a massive backlash against globalization. In fact, Trump, as you know, said, I don't like globalization, I dislike globalization. So what has happened is triumphant nationalism has regained the stage. Aggressive nationalism has regained the stage. And that is why we find all these wars going on. Now, how does this link with our thinking? Are we thinking all the time that we have enemies? Pakistan bhi enemy hai, China bhi enemy hai. If we think about them all the time as enemies, then they will become enemies. I think the time has come. We must change our thinking. And a lot of tips can be found in this book, where lots of things are told how children can be taught कि अच्छे विचार करो. Think well, think positively. And so I must congratulate you, Mala. You're the only person I know who's actually written about thinking. Everybody takes thinking for granted. We all take it for granted. But the way she has उसका जो विश्लेषण किया है विचारधारा का, क्या क्या विचार हो सकते हैं, किस प्रकार के विचार हो सकते हैं, वो बहुत अच्छे ढंग से, छोटी सी किताब है लेकिन इसमें विद्या बहुत है. अगर हम इसको पढ़ें और बच्चों को अगर हम सिखाना शुरू करें तो इससे हम लाभ, क्योंकि ये टीचर रही हैं, जहाँ तक मैं जानता हूँ ये स्कूल टीचर रही हैं, तो बच्चों के साथ इनका परिवार प्रबंध रहा है और उनके साथ इन्होंने काफ़ी इंटरेक्शन किया. सो वी गॉट टू स्टार्ट फ्रॉम स्कूल्स. आई मस्ट टेल यू, Doon school where I was, they did teach you to think. They didn't think for you. Socho, think for yourself.
Right.
I had a very good English teacher, Mr. Siddharthachari. And when we asked the question, no, you think for yourself. Look up your books. Think for yourself. Now, this idea of think for yourself is rare in government schools or in any schools. You just tell the children what you want them to do and they are supposed to do it. The scope for creative thinking hardly exists. So I would suggest that our educationists particularly should have a look at this little book and try and see what they can gain practically in their day-to-day teaching and in their day-to-day life. And this goes on throughout life. I've done so many different things. I was thinking about politics. ये इलेक्शन कैसे जीते हैं, कहाँ से वोट मिलेगा, क्या करें क्या ना करें. तो जैसे जैसे आदमी का whatever you are doing, your thinking also goes in that direction. When I was in Parliament for 40 years, my thinking was about Parliament. So one's thinking changes according to one's outer circumstances. But the capacity to think, सोचने की क्षमता जो है, that is what is important. It doesn't matter what you are thinking about.
True.
But can you think? Are you trained to think? कि ऐसे ही बैठे हो बकरी की तरफ, भेड़ बकरी, चलो जी चलो, चलो सब चलते हैं पीछे पीछे. अपना सोचना पड़ेगा हर एक को, चाहे वो राजनीति हो, चाहे अर्थनीति हो, चाहे विदेश नीति हो, हमें सोचना है. So I think the first important thing is here that we must learn to think. And if you want, this book can be very useful to help you to learn to think. The second book is a sort of a autobiographical novel, as far as I can gather. A sort of a stream of consciousness novel in bits and pieces. It's not what we normally expect in a novel, with a beginning, neat beginning and a neat end. इसमें बहुत सारी कहानियाँ भी हैं, विचारधाराएँ भी हैं, अलग अलग इनमें कैरेक्टर्स भी हैं. So this is, it's called Lives Lived and Unlived, Transition and Transformation. Again, this is about thinking. How do we transit? I've made so many transits in my life. मेरी लाइफ तो सब ट्रांजिट से ही फुल है. बचपन से ट्रांजिट शुरू हुए हैं. कभी रीजन बना, कभी सदर रियासत बना, कभी कैबिनेट मिनिस्टर बना, कभी एम्बेसडर बना, कभी यूनेस्को का कई चीज़ों में बदलता रहा, तो उसमें इंस्पिरेशनल थिंकिंग जो है, one has to have, I'd like to make this point, one has to have an inner center. If you have a strong inner center, then it doesn't matter how many concentric circles they are, you're fine. But if your center shifts, then you become eccentric, then you become neurotic, as we seem to have become in today's world. So along with thinking, we've got to start to develop a strong inner center. And that inner center can revolve around ideas, can revolve around spirituality, around bhakti, around jnana, around yoga. It can revolve around a lot of things, but it has to be developed. What I would like to say is, and you're all very sensible people here, what I've got to say is, develop your inner center firmly. I feel that it has to be a spiritual center. Because intellectual centers never last. आज ये है fashion, कल बदल जाएगा, there'll be a different intellectual center. Look at this artificial intelligence जो आ रही है. अब ये पता नहीं हमें खा जाएगी या हम इसको खा जाएंगे. I'm not sure. Both are possible. It's more likely कि ये हमें खा जाएगी. क्योंकि ये सोच रही है, हम सोच नहीं रहे हैं. वही थिंकिंग वाली बात है ना. Artificial intelligence is thinking 1,000 times quicker than we can think.
What a great idea.
तो कहाँ पहुँचेंगे वो?
This reminds me of something.
So we've got to realize that we are living in an age of tremendous transition. I've seen many transitions in my life. I'm now, by God's grace, 95. I've seen lots of transitions. But ये जो transition अब हो रहा है, this is the most dramatic of all transitions that I've seen. Because, in fact, the whole texture of our consciousness is changing. If you can have machines who are doing your thinking, तो फिर सोचे क्यों आदमी? So therefore, to ride this, as it were, this challenge successfully, we've got to deepen our thinking, develop our thinking, and deepen our inner center. And I think both these books, which Mala has given us, they're small books, but they are valuable. Particularly the one on Think Smart, I think should go into every schoolroom, or every school, at least library. And this Lives Lived and Unlived is also very interesting. So I will really end, because I know that there's always a limited time that I'm given by IIC. They're very strict with me. मैं अध्यक्ष तो रहा हूँ, लेकिन लिहाज नहीं करते मेरा पूरा. बता देते भाई 7:30 बजे तक ख़त्म करना है, तो हम कर देते. हम तो हुक्म के ताबेदार हैं. ये हमारी संस्था रही है. जब ये बना था, by the way, when the foundations were laid by Prince Akihito of Japan, Crown Prince, who later became Emperor, I was there at the foundation.
Oh.
Dr. Radhakrishnan was there, and Dr. C.D. Deshmukh was there, and I was there at the foundation of this. So I've seen this also grow. I don't know what year was that. Do you remember what year the foundation was?
1959, sir.
59. हाँ तो देखिए कितने साल हो गए. So I've seen this fine institution grow. It's a unique institution.
Really?
IIC की तरह कोई institution कहीं है नहीं. दुनिया में बहुत सारे मैंने देखे हैं. और दिल्ली वालों को तो ये कई लोगों ने मुझे कहा कि IIC नहीं होती तो हम घर चले जाते गाँव में. IIC के कारण वो दिल्ली में रहते.
True.
श्रीवास्तव जी,
Yes, sir.
इतना महत्व है IIC का.
Yes, yes, sir.
So I would end up by congratulating you, Mala, for writing these books. You've written a large number of books, I notice, but these two have come today to the public here in
This
in
was,
India.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. the number one.
you live in Canada, don't you, mainly?
No, I live in the air.
No,
Between-
I thought you were in Canada. But whatever. ये किताबें देखो सारी लिखी हुई हैं इन्होंने.
और भी-
10 बारी कितने ये ने पढ़ी है. लेकिन
एक बात मैं बताऊं इनको ये माता हरी वी के लोग क्वेश्चन करते हैं.
जी
Earlier I used to write as Mata Hari V.
माता हरी वी
So my poetry books from England which were published there. So I started writing.
माता हरी तो बड़ी खतरनाक औरत थी.
But I'll tell this
She was
the
that
reason.
spy, no?
So
Mata Hari,
I was
who was
telling-
ultimately shot. So you better change your name.
No, this is what my publisher told me, and the reason why I wrote is because I wanted to remove that prejudice. She was a very learned person in Hinduism, a very good Bharatnatyam dancer, and every man wanted to have 5 minutes with her, just 5 minutes, could do anything with her.
With Mata
I
Hari?
found- and then when she died, when she was given the bullet, murdered, like killed, she did her makeup, she dressed up, and she was not afraid of death. This is the greatest thing. And I came to know from my grandfather, he used to tell me stories. He said she went right ahead, all dressed, and took a bullet right into her face. She didn't cover her face or anything. So there are certain things which, when people get branded, the good in them also goes with the bad. So that's why. Now I changed, ma'am. After my publisher told me.
I think Mana Thapar is
Mana
safer than Mata Hari. So, thank you all very much for coming. This has been one of those pleasant evenings, unusual evenings in India International Centre.
Lovely.
Where we have a small audience, but an intelligent audience. People who are really interested in these sort of things. So, my warm regards to all of you. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Karan Singh, for being here.
माला की किताब के लिए एक छोटा हिंदी का शब्द है
हाँ.
गागर में सागर.
Gagar mein sagar.
What a beautiful thing he said. Gagar mein sagar.
That is true.
Thank you.
You've done a good job.
Thank you, Dr. Karan Singh. Thank you.